It's Jordan Felice. You are beloved. You're on Vision Christian Radio. Neil Johnson with you. It's the Monday edition of 2020. An opportunity over this next hour to hear more concerns from Christian Aboriginal leaders before we're called to cast a vote in a national referendum on the voice. Well, our guests today say a First Nations Christian voice needs to be heard in this debate. Two special guests today, pastors Norman and Barbara Miller from North Queensland. Back in 2012, Pastor Norman Miller campaigned for recognition of Indigenous people in the Constitution and the removal of racism from it. He handed what's called the Miller Boomerang Petition to Federal Parliament back in 2013 and 2016 with over 5,000 signatures, and made a giant boomerang with the words "No Racism" in the Constitution on it. He presented it to the then Speaker of the Parliament. That boomerang was part of an exhibition at the Museum of Australian Democracy in Canberra, where it's now housed. Norman's wife, Pastor Barbara Miller, is the author of 5 books, most of them on Australian history and biography, including one about Aboriginal Christian leader William Cooper. Another is on Ferdinand de Quiros, who declared the Great South Land of the Holy Spirit over what he thought was Australia. Well, Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller are founders of the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace. They're based in Cairns in North Queensland, and joining us live from Cairns today, Pastors Norman and Barbara. Norman, a special welcome to you.
Good morning, Neil, and to your listeners of Christian Vision Radio. What a blessing it is. While I'm speaking to you here from Cairns in our home, there's beautiful rain and that about. So rain is one of those signs of abundant of God's blessing. So we ask and pray through our discussions there this morning, Neil, and to all your listeners. May God bless them and watch over them as we share from, as Barbara and myself share from our hearts what we sense the Lord has been saying to us, but also as the body of Christ in this nation. And so it's wonderful to come together.
And to you, Barbara, a special welcome back to 2020.
Thank you, Neil. It's a pleasure.
Let me just start. A lot of people might not be so familiar with the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace. Norman, the centre itself, you and Barbara, co-founders of the centre, give us some insight into what all that means for listeners who might not be so familiar.
Amen. So Barbara and I will certainly share this time in just sharing of the centre. When we formed it in 2001.
No, 1997.
1997, sorry. There you go. I had to just get my
dates
right.
I like to say just, a couple of decades ago, and that's sort of more general. But
So just a sense there, we do celebrate our 27th year this year of the centre, and it's been something that the Lord has really laid upon our hearts, that Barbara and myself are walking reconciliation, being Indigenous and non-Indigenous Australians, and a wonderful marriage that the Lord has blessed me with. We celebrate this year of our 32nd anniversary there this year, and it's been such a blessing. And our birthday's coming up, so there'll be some special things. But the centre, Neil, we established 27 years ago, and it's been such a blessing how God called us to this ministry together. And therefore anyone who's in Christ is a new creation. The old is gone, the new has come. And that reconciliation ministry that God has placed in our hearts, but also importantly being reconciled to Him, that's the number one priority.
And Barbara, you're the author of the two of you, and you've written a whole bunch of books. Has this level of reconciliation been a part of a theme that's been interwoven through a lot of the writings that you've had? The thought that there's that Australia is a one nation and reconciliation is the goal. How have you been able to approach that in a lot of the books that you've written?
Yes, so reconciliation is certainly a goal, and also just recording the history. And so to know who we are as a nation, where we've come from and where we're going, we do need to have an understanding of our history. And so I have made an effort to do that, and to have Indigenous voices speak through my book, but also to record the wonderful advances that we have had in the area of Aboriginal advancement, because a lot of people focus only on the problems, and we are certainly very concerned about the disadvantage that's still there with the closing the gap. But there have been tremendous advances as well, and certainly with reconciliation, there have been huge advances in our nation.
Well, Norman, you and Barbara, you're in Cairns, Aboriginal pastor and leader, and of course in Cairns perhaps more than any other place around the nation. You might be thinking Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islanders, and we talk about First Nations people, Aboriginal, Torres Strait Islander people. You have been a big supporter of recognition of First Nations people in Australia's Constitution for a long, long time now. How have you been finding the environment in Cairns around the debate about the voice?
Just last week, Neil, there was the body of the committee that came together for this referendum, and Barbara and myself was able to be there, even though we didn't get the opportunity to speak at the the constitutional committee gathering. It was important that I was able to connect up with key leaders that was there. One of them was the now Karen Little of the of the Coalition Party, and also one of the party of the I'm just trying to think. Yes. The National Party.
So basically what it was the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee on the Voice Referendum. So we were able to listen to submissions all day. As time ran out, Norman has put a written submission in, because the closing date was on the 21st. But I would say basically from what we heard was that people were generally supporting the voice, although they had some concerns about it. There was a big group of mayors from the Torres Strait came down and gave a submission.
Let me ask you about the Christian Aboriginal voice, because there might be a lot of political leaders, activist voices that are very much being heard around the nation. What about the Christian Aboriginal leader voice? Do you have a perspective on that, Norman? What have you noted about the Christian voice in the whole debate so far?
Well, that's one of the things that I've spoken to leaders in Christian leaders, prayer movements, that one of the things that I've noticed that has been lacking is the Christian voice, but also the Indigenous Christian voice in this whole debate. As the Bible would say, it says, simply let your yes be yes and your no be no. And that's our election in God is so important. And we're called to pray for those that are in authority. We're called to pray for our government. And was one of the scriptures that has been planted on our hearts is the Isaiah 9:6 scripture about the government is on the shoulders of Jesus Christ, our Lord and Savior. And so as a Christian voice, that it's one of those things that has been lacking. And Neil, one of the things when we talk about a First Nations people is that, we as Indigenous people, even as tribes that we all from, I come from 3 tribes of Dhirubal, Barbaram, Table and Yidinji. And when I pray and when Barbara prays, we pray that our tribe that we come from, is that it lines up with the line of the tribe of Judah. So there is many different tribes of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people, and the importance that when we look at things, when I look at things of the voice, one of the clear directions that Jesus will speaks through his word is that he says, "My sheep will hear my voice." And so, as a First Nation Christian pastor, Indigenous leader, that for me, my first priority as a First Nation is to seek ye first His kingdom. And that was one of the words that the Lord always spoke to me. He says, as a First Nation, your priority is to seek ye first His kingdom, the kingdom of God. And I just a sense that as we put Him first in everything, that we know that these discussions and really hearing His voice, and my for those that are listening, I would importantly encourage you that we hear different voices. We can hear different voices of families, of friends, and that around us. But the importance is that we as Christians, we as Indigenous Christians, hear what God is speaking to us about. And as a ministry of reconciliation that we have, for me, this whole voice debate, it's in the beginning, Neil, I was there. I was there for it. But then some of those things, the landscape of this discussion has certainly changed. And so my view is that when I come back and listen to what God is saying and on the foundations that, and I have said it at this meeting just recently, is that the foundations, we need to, as a nation, we need to get back to those godly foundations.
So when you, as an Aboriginal leader, Norman, reflecting as you just have, let your yes be yes and your no be no. I mean, this is the options we're going to have, isn't it, when we do vote in this referendum. But you've got your own concerns about the outcomes of a referendum like this. I'm wondering whether you can simply articulate what your position is as an Aboriginal Christian leader when it comes to the voice.
Well, it's the importance has been on the side that God is on, and He can never fail us. But the decisions that we make, we all have to make them. And I would encourage Indigenous and non-Indigenous Christians that we make sure that the way we simply let our yes be yes or our no be no, be right and just in the eyes of God. I believe that this voice, how the campaign may get up, is it going to bring changes to Aboriginal people? Is it going to? Are we going to see the results of the closing the gap? Look, there's been many good things that this nation has already achieved. Right back when I began to write some things down on the journey of reconciliation in the eyes of those that of a nation that we all believe that want to see this nation turn to God and reconcile to Him. But we know that there is a journey for each one of us and a journey for our nation. They said in 1990 there was the progress towards reconciliation. In 1991, the Australian Parliament processed this act, which they set up a council for the Australian reconciliation. What we see also in schools is that there has been a reconciliation plan in schools, in various workplaces. So all these things are already been advancing, and there's been talk of this, if there is a either way of yes or no in this campaign, it will in ways the reconciliation movement will stop in a way. But we know that it has never, Australian as a nation, in the year 2000, there was over 250,000 people from all spheres of the community that walked the Sydney Harbour Bridge. Now that was an act of reconciliation, to seeing our white and black people walk together. There's been many journeys that Indigenous and non-Indigenous people, Christians, we know of conferences that we've all been on. There's been acts of reconciliation. There's been in the spirit, where Christian churches have always gathered in the spirit of unity. So Neil, the thing is, I sense that to removing this racism is a must. And let me say this, Mr. Albanese, Prime Minister Anthony Albanese, has it written in his surname to ban this discrimination law.
Right, okay. We're going to continue our conversation in just a few moments, and I do want to invite listeners to join in. You might have your own thoughts on the things you're hearing shared from Christian Aboriginal leaders around yes or no on the referendum that we're all going to be called to vote on. So 1-800-316-316 to join in our conversation. 1-800-316-316. Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller, founders of the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace. They're our guests. They have a website too, reconciliationandpeace.org. We're back with more in just a few moments. Well, our talkback line is open on 1-800-316-316. Our special guests this hour, Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller, founders of the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace, long-time campaigners in the reconciliation space. Just before we move on, though, here you were making a little bit of a quip there at the as we went to the break, Norman, and suggesting there's something in the name of our Prime Minister, Anthony Albanese, and I'm sorry I wasn't quick enough to catch up on it, but what were you intending to say?
Oh, the sense was, it's written in his name to to ban this discrimination, the racism that's there. It's there, and I think that that's a step that he really could take. We don't want a divided Australia. Australia has been a blessed nation. You only have to look at people that have travelled from different parts of nations that they've been in turmoil. And, they've been wanting to come to Australia and make Australia, because of places, of worn-torn places that they are. And they see a better Australia. They see a better future. So the importance there of that is that, we want to see more conversations happen. I love it, Neil, when I grew up of being around campfires and places where I grew up and telling stories with my brothers and sisters, but telling stories with friends, and all these things, and having a cup of tea. Not always. It doesn't always have to happen in a hotel, a 5-star hotel room, or anything like that, or in air-conditioned places, but having them under a mango tree. You get me around those places, and good discussions, great discussions can come out of that. So we want to move forward, and that's where I believe, as white and black Australians, we just can be so proud of our nation, what God has planned for us all.
We're taking calls 1-800-316-316. We'll take some in just a few moments. One listener called through and said, wondering what our guests are actually proposing, because we're not hearing anything that's actually relevant to the voice. Now, I don't think that's a criticism of you, insofar as I think you are articulating some beautiful things that are below and deeper than just yes and no here. But I'm going to come to you, Barbara, because when we talk about the voice, the question that we'll all be asked to say either yes or no. But I know that listeners, having heard what you've shared so far and appreciated every word, are wondering whether you are thinking that a yes vote in the voice will actually promote the cause of reconciliation. Barbara, what are your thoughts here?
Well, we're very clear on this, and Norman has made a submission to the Joint Parliamentary Select Committee on this point, saying we do not support a voice in the Constitution. We're very, very clear on that, and we have a lot of reasons for that. Before we go to those reasons, we would say that there are a lot of voices already, but if we have to have a voice, it should at least be a legislated voice, not in the Constitution. If it's in the Constitution, one of our points is that it's going to divide the nation along the lines of race. It's going to put group-based rights in the Constitution. It's going to create two classes of citizens based on race. So Norman has been campaigning for many years to remove racism from the Constitution. This is going to enshrine racism in the Constitution.
That is an amazing insight. And before we take any calls, Norman, when you actually do articulate that the no position is the one that preserves a reconciliation path, what sort of response do you get from Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples who feel like this is going to be our opportunity to be recognised, but when you go a little bit deeper, there's some other issues which seem to be overlooked in the debate when you're in a shallow end. How are you feeling about that, Norman, and Aboriginal Torres Strait Islander people when they hear that you're standing and saying no?
Well, it's been the campaign, as you know, as we have alluded, since 2012. And I presented over 360 signatures on this large boomerang. That boomerang was 2 meters. And it was on a grassroots level that I said from the outset, when the expert panel, Tony Abbott was the Prime Minister then, and he had Indigenous leaders there that was working on that expert panel. And what was basically, in a nutshell, was I campaigned to have a no racism in the Constitution. So I've said it, I publicly walked with that boomerang. I not only presented it to Parliament House in 2013, with over 5,000 signatures, 5,100 signatures.
A lot of them Indigenous people.
That was from a grassroots. I had Aboriginal mayors from those places, Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander mayors. As I said, it was grassroots at my own cost. That I was standing on streets of Sydney, Western Australia, Melbourne, going to football grounds, gaining over 5,000 signatures. I was able to present this boomerang to the then Speaker of the House, Bronwyn Bishop, and also our Member of Parliament from Leichhardt here, Warren Ench, who's the coalition MP in Cairns here, and also Ken White. Ken White was also in that same photo. Was the Liberal? He was in cabinet, sitting in cabinet before. When he lost his seat this last election. But there was over 5,000 signatures, and the signatures are also in Hansard. So it's been a driving force to see that right from the outset. I've always said, and as I said, displayed it. I've walked the streets of Cairns that many times with it and saying no racism in the Constitution. So that's from my heart. And when you hear, there are a lot of Indigenous people in Cairns here that there would be some that would be, I can't speak for them all at the moment, but there would be those that would be viewing what's taking place, because one of the things we need to also just look at, that it's discrimination against also just the tribes of Indigenous people there as well. When we talk about Indigenous people, we've got to go right back to the tribes that it's going to affect, and that's where a lot of non-Indigenous people, when they just relate to Indigenous people, but we come from tribes, so that it's affecting there as well. It can affect, like my marriage to my beautiful wife, who's white Australian. I just thank God that Barbara, that we discuss a lot of things, But my whole family, I have a brother, I have a sister that's married into non-Indigenous families. And I don't want to see those divisions appear in my own family, and nor do I want to see it within the nation as a whole, nor do I want to see it in churches.
We're going to break for news, and the interesting thing for listeners right now is getting that racism away from the Constitution. That equals a no vote. That's what you're hearing our guests say. You might agree with that or not. Well, our talkback line is open. We'll take some calls after Vision National News. So 1800 316 316. Our special guests, Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller, founders of the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace. We're back with more shortly. Wonderful to have you with us on this Monday edition of 2020. If you are just joining us, joining into a very important and very insightful conversation on the Voice Referendum, an opportunity today to hear some of the concerns from Christian Aboriginal leaders before we're all called on to cast a vote in a national referendum for the voice. Our guests today say a First Nations Christian voice needs to be heard in this debate. Two special guests, Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller from North Queensland, and long-time campaigners for recognition of Indigenous people in the Constitution and for the removal of racism from it. Of course, the two guests we have today are founders of the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace, Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. Norman and Barbara, let's take a call from a listener before we go any further. Alex is waiting very patiently. Alex, thanks so much for waiting patiently. What are your thoughts?
Thank you, Neil. And Barbara, Norman and Barbara, yes, I'm a Christian and I'm living in a world that's very troubled, as we know, and that's because of our sin. And I believe that the Word of God teaches us in His prayer, forgive and you will be forgiven. And that's the boomerang in God's Word. And so, and I understand also in God's Word that be content with what you have and fight the good fight and make a good witness in this troubled world. And keep going that way. That's the best that we can do to glorify God and hopefully help others as well.
A wonderful thought there, Alex. Let me come to Norman. Your thoughts here for Alex in Melbourne.
Alex, good to hear your voice. And Alex, thank you for sharing, and thank you for sharing the word of encouragement. Yes, importantly, fighting the good fight. And, that's the importance that we, they say Australia is a nation that punches above its weight. I know that we're not with the fighting, but it's spiritually, the prayers that we have. The importance also that, Alex, that I was reminded when there was another gathering here in Cairns, because of governments and other things, I brought it back to how the Lord's Prayer, and that's the most important thing. I can recall many times that when there's been meetings in Aboriginal communities or Torres Strait Islander communities, the importance of before those events would start, before a meeting would take place, that there would be prayer given to God. And, that's the most honourable and blessed thing, that as we continually, even as Christians, but amongst us were people that were not Christians, but they wanted the Lord's Prayer. And that's important, that we must have it in all governments, and the church must always come back to the Lord's Prayer that He taught His disciples. So thank you, Alex.
Alex in Melbourne, thank you so much for your call. Our talkback line is open on 1800 316 316. You might have your own question, a comment, even a critique for our conversation. 1800 316 316. Barbara, let me come to you, because just before the news, we were talking about the sort of division that is likely if there is a yes vote and there is the voice inserted into our constitution, it's one thing to talk about a division between black and white, so to speak, but the division between Indigenous peoples, one tribe against another. What are your thoughts or concerns here around these other divisions that may not be resolved by adding the voice to a constitution?
Well, we're very concerned about that, Neil. The National Native Title Act 1993 had unintended consequences of dividing a lot of Indigenous people. And so people are still fighting. Aboriginal traditional owner groups are still fighting with each other today, even in our own city of Cairns, but around the nation, over who owns native title to the land and who can speak at welcome to countries. So that was an unintended consequence. We're concerned about what unintended consequences there will be with a voice, and that, getting representation of 22 people around the nation to speak for the whole a nation of First Nations people is going to be very difficult, because people can't speak for another person's country, for one thing. That's protocol in Indigenous culture. So yeah, they're going to be huge issues with that.
Division, one tribe against another. Just to bring you back in here, Norman, and reflecting on some things we were talking about in the first part of our conversation, the thought that reconciliation with God is a first priority. Some people like to brush that away as though it's some sort of symbolism or whatever, but reconciliation first to God, then to one another. If you want to have harmony between people groups, tribal groups, even black and white, somehow or other, you've got to be able to acknowledge God in all of that, because He is the recipe here for how harmony happens. Any thoughts here, when you come across all of this division, how your message of reconciliation first to God and His kingdom, and then to one another? Thoughts here from you, Norman?
Well, Neil, as we've been talking, Psalms 133 comes into mind very, very clearly, that when brothers and sisters dwell together in unity, there the Lord commands a blessing. And, that's one of the importance of a commanded blessing from the Lord when we come together. And the other scripture also, where it says a house divided, or a house in faction, and it's like a nation divided against itself. A house divided against itself cannot stand. Tribes divided by themselves cannot stand. And, the importance that when Jesus created the heavens and the earth and put everything there, He put tribes in certain places because He Himself comes from the line of tribe of Judah. So He knows when He's placed tribes into various places, even with our own nation of Australia. As Barbara mentioned, protocol, that's so important. Even though I come from 3 tribes, Neil, I can't go and speak for the tribe of Yarrabah, of the Irukandji or the Kukuwalanji in the Mossman Port Douglas area. There's that respect and that protocol. One of the things that as a First Nations people is that we've got to get back and we've got to acknowledge our Creator that created the heavens and the earth, and that it's Him that's put every people and tribe. And as the book of Revelations, we know that there'll be, we all have our ways. There are many voices. I like Psalms 139 that, without my mum, when she gave birth to each of us as children, that we cried. We said things right from our time of birth. So we were a voice right back there. There are Indigenous voices. There are non-Indigenous voices that are there. We can be a voice, just like John the Baptist was a voice of the one crying in the wilderness. There are many people that from the tribes of the desert, they've got a voice to speak. And we need to allow those conversations there are many people that's in tribal areas that they don't even have the understanding of what this voice is actually all about. And so, I think when they, as Barbara said, that they will be looking at 22 on that committee. Well, how do you justify something like that? Australia is a democratic nation, and I just want to thank God right now that where there is sitting in Parliament, there is 11 Indigenous people's voices that are there, that they have been democratically elected. So the ways of the land, the laws of the land, but there's the laws there of God, because He is our judge, He is our lawyer, and He is one who gives life. So there needs to be democratically elected people that can come in. Otherwise, it's going to be like from the top heavy of people that are already in government type positions and already having a time to speak into government. We need those that are on grassroots level to be able to allow their voices to come and say, make the changes. Look, Neil, you and I know, and many of your viewers are listening, what's happening in Alice Springs right now. And right now, we need the voice of this nation to come together, united. And I think that in all what we're discussing here now, it is a distraction. You and I could think of how that money, our finances could be put into money that can bring renewal, that can bring transformation right now. I give it to the former Prime Minister Tony. When he was the Prime Minister of the nation, he went into an Aboriginal community and he worked in a community.
Leaders who will go and sit in the dirt and talk and appreciate and feel the culture. I suspect what you're saying here is this is what we need from our leaders to understand different tribal positions and what happens in North Queensland where you are. Yes, there are different things and there are different tribal groups even in Central Australia, and we were talking to some of those in Central Australia just recently, and just to reflect that many of the Aboriginal people in Central Australia are by report not even aware that there is a voice, not even aware that there is a debate. And so getting into these deeper things, that takes a little bit of time getting your head around it. The two of you, and I'll come to you here, Barbara, the two of you who have been in this zone now for a long, long time, seeking recognition for Aboriginal people in our Australian Constitution. Barbara, you have got your head around constitutional issues, and it's not just the inclusion of something new in a constitution. You've had some concerns over various other aspects of the constitution. We won't be able to take a long time on this, but how do you describe some of the other issues that are concerning?
I'll just give you a list fairly quickly. One concern that if there is a voice in the constitution, that it would bring a lot of delays in terms of government being able to operate, and also High Court challenges are very, very likely. So if it does get into the Constitution, we would like to see executive government removed. Frank Brennan has said that it could advise Parliament and Ministers of the Crown as a compromise. So I'll just quickly go through these. There should have been a proper constitutional convention that traditionally happens. That has not happened. So we haven't been able to have a good debate over the pros and cons. Also, there should have been a draft legislation put out, because there's a lot of lack of clarity around this. And it's not good enough to say to vote on a vibe, and then we'll put together the legislation afterwards. The other thing is there's been unequal funding, and for the yes and no campaign. There's no funding really for the no campaign. Education program should normally be for the yes and no campaign. So that's really been a big issue. As Norman said, we have 11 First Nations people in the federal parliament. Now, that's above the representation of the percentage of First Nations people in the communities. That's a very good outcome. Also, we have many national First Nations organisations, for example, for native title, for health, housing, education, childcare, and the list goes on. There's 16 of them, and they have formed into a coalition of peaks. So there's already a voice there. That's why we think a legislated voice would be a compromise. But, you know, there's hundreds and hundreds of First Nations organisations. There's 80 state organisations that are part of this coalition of peaks. So what this means is we're going to have another layer of bureaucracy on top of all this First Nations voices that are already there. So it's going to be a huge amount of funding that will go to it. We're concerned that people on the ground, like the situation in Alice Springs and other places that we mentioned, all over Northern Australia, for example, who have these problems, look, the closing the gap, that's where we really need to have the finance go. And the Coalition of Peaks, they're not a toothless organisation. They spent a couple of years negotiating with the Morrison government to have more targets and to, for example, reducing Indigenous incarceration, and also to have better ways of reaching the targets. So the mechanisms are really already there. And I'd like to just quickly add to what Norman said before about God putting people in their places and the times they should be there. That's Acts 17:26. Also, Galatians 3:28 says that there's neither male nor female, rich nor poor, slave nor free, which is economic differences, because we're all one in Christ.
Yes, not a selection of different races, because we're all one in Christ, which means one race, one people, all created in the image and likeness of God. Hey, we've got just a few minutes remaining for our conversation, and if we're talking about solutions or things that you might aspire to, or the sorts of changes you think might be really beneficial for those who are in positions of authority right now to be taking note of, you're suggesting that the referendum question should be split into two propositions. I wonder if you can outline for us how you think you could resolve these issues by getting that recognition into the Constitution and yet preserving us from that wedge that can be driving not only black and white Australia apart, but also tribal groups apart as well. Two propositions. Where do we start here with that?
Yeah, so what we'd like to see is to have the referendum question put to the vote later this year to be split in two. So the first part is recognition of First Nations people in the Constitution, and the second part is about the voice. I believe the first part, well, we both believe the first part would get the support of Australians very easily because there's a lot of goodwill. The last part may not get through, which means we lose the opportunity for maybe a generation to get recognition of First Nations people in the Constitution. Now, a preamble is not probably a favourable way to go anymore. It was rejected by the Republic referendum, probably would be rejected by most First Nations people today. But the expert panel, which gave its report in 2012 and which Norman based his Miller Boomerang petition on, was to have Section 51 added to the Constitution that would recognise First Nations people but still allow the federal government to make laws for them. So the solution is already there. It's been staring us in the face for quite a long time.
So an insertion of a new Section 51A in the Constitution, and to recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples and to preserve the Australian government's ability to pass laws for the benefit of Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples. Other constitutional things, I think you've got some notes on a new Section 116A, banning racial discrimination by government. And another one, I'll get your general overall here, but the insertion of a new Section 127A, recognising Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander languages were this country's first tongues, while confirming that English is Australia's national language. So there's compromise in there, but it's inclusion so that Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander peoples are not left out. Norman, your thoughts here on inclusion somewhere in the Constitution for these things? Otherwise, you could be left out, as Barbara says, for another generation.
I believe that this is why things are just so important, that we hear God's voice, and like what you've just read out there, Neil, we believe that this as a nation, God's just blessed us as a nation, but we need to come very strongly as Christians. I've been so heartily blessed when I've heard that Queensland, within the state of Queensland, we could certainly see this, a favour in God, that how this would come about. And I'm saying that, as Australians, I want to stand strong with with all Australians, and I want to see us move forward. Together. Neil, we have National Reconciliation Week, and it's something that's been happening year and year in schools. I've participated Reconciliation Week, not only in church but in schools. That will be coming up on the 27th to the 3rd of June, and the theme for that is to be a voice for generations. And I think that's the importance, that as we hear God's voice, that we can be a voice for many generations. I want to be a voice for my little nieces and nephews. I want to see them come into a destiny that God calls this whole nation to come into. I want to see a fruitful and a blessed nation, as God has truly blessed us, that we move forward. We will always need to move forward. And Barbara and myself and all those that stand for people like yourself, Neil, that's a voice in the media. You were special, that to allowing people like voices of mine. I would not have probably been heard as a Christian voice if Vision Australia, yourself, Neil, if I didn't have this opportunity. So I thank you, Neil. I thank Vision Australia, the radio that you're doing. You're a voice for many that is getting this out there, that we can all make a difference, that we can all make a stand, that we can treasure and be blessed of many, many things that God has for us. And, there's a heavenly constitution. We know of that God rules and reigns. He will always rule and reign. And like that boomerang, he says, hey, do not let your hearts be troubled, but trust in God. Trust also in me. He said, in my Father's house are many mansions. If it was not so, he said, I would have told you. He said, I go there to prepare a place for you. And if I go there to prepare a place for you, he said, like the boomerang, he says, I will come back. So we need to receive a return of good values, moral values. We need to see a return of good and standing reconciliations. And as we can walk in the desert areas, as we can have those cup of teas around campfires, those are things that this nation will always and forever cherish. So Neil, thank you for allowing Barbara and myself to be a voice, and the voice of Christians, Indigenous Christians, also being heard, the voice of Christians being heard, that like John the Baptist, the voice in the desert, but we're the voice in the city. And to those that are listening, continually there's a time for silence, but there's a time for a speak. We're the voice in the rainforest. Yes, on the hills, on the mountains, we can all be that voice that that brings about changes. And it's some of those changes are not big, great leap steps, but they're just journeys that we all travel on. And so this has been a journey, and I want to thank once again, thank you, Neil, to all your listeners, that God will speak to you, and that I believe that decisions that you make are of God.
Wonderful.
Amen.
And special honour to the two of you as well. And even as you're saying, isn't it good for Vision to create an opportunity like this? I'm the first one to say, isn't it good for every single listener who's ever been a supporter of this ministry, because they're the ones who've made it happen, in that sense of those who have given a donation, made self-sacrificial ways of contributing to making a media organisation like this create opportunities for people like the two of you, who are you're just gems, you're stars. Pastors Norman and Barbara Miller, the founders of the Centre for International Reconciliation and Peace. Here's the website to connect with Barbara and Norman: reconciliationandpeace.org. reconciliationandpeace.org. I might just mention too that Norman's also an Aboriginal artist with his own gallery. There's a website too there, munganbana.com.au, and there's a coffee table art book you can get a hold of. I mentioned that Barbara's also authored 5 books. She's also a psychologist, a sociologist, a mediator, teacher and writer. Barbara Miller, or barbara-miller-books.com, to be able to access any of those. Norman and Barbara, thank you so much for sharing your hearts with us today on 2020.
Thank you, Neil. God bless you.